What's good, meaningful movers? Welcome back to Move With Meaning, the podcast where actions have meaning, words have meaning, and we open up the conversations to discover what's your next move. I'm your host, Krystal. In today's episode, let's make a connection between personal and professional well-being. A lot of times we focus on the why and the how, but today let's build on that and tack on the when. But you know how we do it here. We need to set that theme, so let's go ahead and do that. The word of the day is implosion. We have heard of explosion, which is when there is an eruption outwardly. Implosion is when that same action happens, but inwardly. This is not to say that there won't be some collateral, but how do we know when to snuff out the fuse before the bomb goes off? Well, that's enough of me talking. How about we introduce our guest? And there's no one better to do that than herself. Celeste, why don't you give the people a bit of background about yourself and what you're going to share with us today?
Sure. Thank you, Krystal, for having me. This is really an honor. My name is Celeste Stacey. I help high-stress professionals who are in chronic overwhelm, and I help them release that overwhelm and a life that supports it so they can feel free and love their life again. Interestingly, I come from a background of information technology. I was a business intelligence analyst for many, many years, over 2 decades, and I also have a dual background of being a coach, something called a coactive coach, and I was trained by the Coactive Training Institute, which is one of the oldest and most well-renowned coaches training institutes in the world.
I really have to just call this point out. Why I'm so excited for this is because, we're in information technology, but it's so broad, that spectrum, that we not only are part of the same industry, but we are part of the same niche.
Yes!
This is intelligence. You do not come across that many people.
You do not. You absolutely do not. Business intelligence is literally one of the most important, including cybersecurity. I would say cybersecurity is foundational. Business intelligence is arguably the most important aspect of information technology because it deals with data and all the nuances of how to read it, how to collect it, how to analyze it. And it is essential when you are dealing with individuals who want to have a certain output from their data to make sure that you are getting exactly what is required to add insight. Krystal knows that is not an easy thing to do.
Nope.
Got to be good.
I'm over here about to speak in tongues. I mean, you're so right. And I love that you and we both transition out of that particular career setting and into coaching. I think we're the best to do it, right? Because like you said, it's ingrained in us to just analyze what people are telling us.
Absolutely.
Like we read it all and we don't judge. We just say what it is. And then we ask questions because you got to tell us. Anyway, we're going to get to it. Yeah, let's start with your backstory. What's the personal motivation, I guess, drove you into where we are with chronic overwhelm?
Absolutely. So my backstory is I come from a nuclear family. I grew up in New York. I'm one of 2 siblings. I'm actually the youngest. And I grew up in a time where being dark-skinned, being Black, my experience was seen as like a double hex, right? Add to that the fact that I was chubby and I wore thick glasses and I experienced a lot of trauma growing up. I just basically took it as a fact that I was ugly. I mean, Krystal, it was so bad that for my prom, my bestie, my best friend, her prom date refused to have me in his group pictures. So a week before the prom, she had to ditch him and I had to give her my prom date and I took someone else to the prom. Yeah, I just knew I was ugly. But my one redeeming quality is that I knew I was smart. Like from the beginning, from when I was a kid in elementary school, the first time I saw like the word excellent written across my page with a gold star, I like fell in love with it. And I was like, what does this mean? And the teacher told me, she said, that means you're better than great. And I just like latched onto that. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm excellent. I'm good. I'm smart. My parents took pride in my academic achievements. And so I knew that even if I felt unlovable as an individual, I could still kind of garner brownie points and accolades through achievement. My father was always the type of person who would say, if you told him, hey, Dad, I got a job like sweeping the campus floor, then he would say, well, today it's sweeping the floor. Tomorrow you're going to like own the joint, right? And so, which is great, right? That's nice. However, it sets a precedent and puts pressure on a young person to sort of assume the responsibility of the family's pride.
Yeah.
So they unwittingly put on me that responsibility, and they didn't know, because my mom loved to brag and my dad was in a time where he didn't get a lot of opportunities. Very, very intelligent man. And he would train people that he would see move up the ranks, and those people were Caucasian white men.
Yeah.
So he unwittingly put that on me, and I was glad to oblige. Throughout my life, I made decisions that were not necessarily self-supporting because I wanted to get those accolades and I wanted to carry the family banner in a way that I represented well. And it landed me in a high stress career that I didn't necessarily fit into, I fell into. It landed me in roles that I didn't completely want, but I knew that they would make my family proud. Nobody knew I was building up in chronic overwhelm. Nobody knew what I was going on inside, because high achievers tend to plaster a smile on our faces and march on and, do what we need to do, right?
Yeah.
So nobody really knew, even though I built 2 successful companies. I built a business intelligence consulting and staffing company. I built a successful life coaching company, and no one knew that I was imploding, right? Your key word, nobody knew.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know, because I normalized and justified and absorbed all of the things that people miss that I know now were common warning signs. And it wasn't until I got to a point where a lot was going on. I was a caregiver for my father on top of a lot of things that were happening. It got to a point where one day I opened my laptop and just out of nowhere, I started crying. I mean, I literally burst into tears without my consent, without my logical consent. My body responded in a way where the tears just started coming and I was blindsided. And from there, I started, like right before meetings, literally involuntarily almost, I would feel like I wanted to stifle a scream.
Yeah.
My functioning went down to about 10%. My productivity went down to about 10%. And this was going toward burnout, right? So I distinguish chronic overwhelm from burnout, and we could talk about that. But I was so close to burnout. And I didn't realize it until it actually happened. And I had a pretty bad breakdown.
Yeah.
And it was at that point where I started really paying attention to what was going on, because I was close to non-existent in my form of self-possession, meaning that I almost could not control my body's responses to life situations. That is when you get to severe burnout. And I had all of these signs beforehand. I had all of the signs, and I normalized it and I rationalized it, and I just kept moving. It got to the point where once I started paying attention to certain things, I went to therapy for a short time, and I really started looking into and studying overwhelm. And I realized the differences and all the nuances of it. And I started to recognize it in other people. From there, I was just like, no, I don't want people to suffer as badly as I suffered, because I suffered really, really badly. And I started to wave the red flag and shout from the rooftops about this to alert people. I found is a lot of people are in denial about it. A lot of people just call it life. I started working with people on it and teasing apart. I like to call them fact-feeling intersections. I started exploring those intersections and teasing them apart. And in doing so, people started really admitting the fact that they were overwhelmed, and they called it so many different things.
Oh, amen.
Yeah. And when I learned the misconceptions and when I really dug into the layers of what was going on, I saw that, oh my gosh, this is so pervasive and this is like unacceptable. that we normalize this in our society. So yeah, that's what made me really be on a mission to help as many people as I could.
Your story and mine are so much alike. I'm kind of the same way too. I think I went into IT just because I knew it was the thing that was on the uptick. It was more about job security. As I kept going, I was like, I don't even like doing this. You're right. You start to normalize and you're like, you just started to just get really comfortable with the daily grind. And you start to miss out on things and you're trying to fill in these gaps, right? So what I would do I had to take my kids, and so I was trying in my head, I was like, no, my kids come first. Okay, I still need to work. So I would take my kids and drop them off to martial arts class. But instead of sitting in there watching them, I was sitting in my car on the computer. And then they would come out and say, did you see? It was like I was trying to normalize and justify and rationalize, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm putting my kids first because I got them here. But I really wasn't, because I wasn't ever present in those moments with them. I had the same breakdown differently. I got off of a call with a really obnoxious coworker. I was like, I just need to take a shower. I don't even know why I was thinking like I need to get in the shower. Just like I just need to go get in the shower. And I did the same thing where I just bawled. And you're right. I love how you said that, without your consent, because I didn't.
You don't see it coming. See it coming.
It was the closest I could think of coming to a breakdown. And I think this is such a good point that you bring up, that you leave a field of such high success. Like when you left business intelligence consulting and staffing, like you were set. Mm-hmm. Like the way I look at it, 5 years, you're in the game, you can retire. You were set. You didn't have to leave and say, my passion is for the people.
Right.
So maybe I'm done, but there's others who's still in the game and I can save them.
Yeah.
I love that. So tell me about chronic overwhelm. Well, what is chronic overwhelm, first of all?
Sure. And first I want to say, I believe that we are here to better the journey for others. So sure, we can walk away with what we have and live a great life. But I believe that there's something within each of us that calls us to serve. And we could either heed the calling or ignore it. I personally believe that's why we're here. So let's talk about chronic overwhelm. So chronic overwhelm feels like a persistent hum of mental restlessness that you cannot tune out enough to feel completely relaxed or free. So I like to say, even when you are smiling, even when you are resting, you do not feel completely at rest, because the weight of all the things that you are mentally juggling in your head, and the guilt and the responsibility and obligation of all of those shoulds associated with those things just will not let you feel free. And it is coupled with anxiety and stress, and often very, very confused with them, and also very confused with burnout. But at its core, that is what chronic overwhelm is. And we normalize it and we rationalize it, and we do all the things that tell us that, oh, this is life, that we don't understand that that is not a normal state.
How do we do that? Why do we do that? Do you know why we normalize? Or why did you normalize? Let's talk about that first.
That's a great question. I think in general, we normalize because society does. To hear people say, oh, I'm so busy. In a way, it's like a badge of honor. Say, oh, I got stuff going on. Oh, it's so hectic and so busy. We normalize that as a society. Then we say, to fix this thing, oh, become more zen. And, so there are mixed messages. The reason I normalized it is because I developed a persona based on the identity that I was given in my formative years. So when I talked about the fact that, I just knew that I was unlovable in a certain sense, but as an achiever, I was very, very much highlighted coming up. There's this wave of shame and guilt that you ride in there in some way. Most people, most overachievers, most people in chronic overwhelm have grown up in either guilt or shame in some way, some form of it in some way. And so for me, there was this roller coaster that I rode of being all that, yet not enough at the same time. So for example, even though I was the youngest, I was looked at times to be the fixer, the over supporter, the go-to person in my family. And when I intervened and helped in certain situations, I was resented. And when I stepped back, I was called selfish. So I was like all that and never enough at the same time. And so for me, I normalized going after more and more and more because it was a way for me to cope and try to make sense of that feeling of being not enough versus being bragged about. So that's how I normalized it. And I said, okay, this is just what I need to do. This is just who I am. I am that supporter. That's why I normalized it.
Wow. Are you okay? You're the youngest. Are you the only girl?
No. I have an older sibling who's a sister. I have an older sister. This is the interesting part though, Krystal. I think it's normal to look for patterns in those things. I work with people who were the eldest of several siblings. I have people who are middle children. I have people who are younger. And we naturally want to make sense of those things. We naturally want to say, well, I was the eldest, so I was looked upon to just take care of my younger siblings. And I wasn't given the breaks that my younger siblings were given. And that's a valid thing, right? And then you have the younger children and they're looked at it as a different way, or middle children. Personally, I don't think it's the position of the siblings. I think it is the way that we give meaning to what happens to us in life. So you can take identical twins who were raised in the same family, had the same experiences, yet the meaning that they give those experiences can be completely different. And that determines how they make decisions in the future. That determines whether or not they fall into overwhelm. Honestly, it's very, very individual.
Very, very. I'm glad I asked that because I fell into the first category.
You were the eldest.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But the same way that you describe your feelings of being everything but not enough at the same time, my brother could do the same stuff and get light sentences. That's the way I call them, like light punishments. I'm looking around like we are exactly the same. So anyway, we digressing. So what are your 5 signs? Tell me about these 5 signs that we may be at risk. And you call this a toxic cocktail. I like that.
Yeah, it's definitely a toxic cocktail. So one of the first signs that is commonly ignored is that you have difficulty feeling completely relaxed, right? And at one point or another, we all have that, right? At one point or another, our sleep is crap and we feel restless, but we're talking about chronically, right? So there are 2 types of overwhelm. There's acute overwhelm and there's chronic overwhelm. And acute happens in the moment. When it settles, it dies down. I like to compare it to a snow globe, where when you shake it up, snow is all over the place. You can't see, it seems chaotic, and then it settles down. And you shake it up and it happens and it settles down. So that's acute overwhelm. Now, chronic overwhelm is something completely different and long-term, where all that shaking happens. It feels more like a haze, like this persistent haze that you just can't see through. So you normalize it as your view. So that first sign of your inability to feel completely relaxed, that's not normal, right? Even when something is not going on. So people I work with who are in chronic overwhelm, even when they remove themselves from the work environment, they find themselves like scrolling social media, for instance. These are coping mechanisms. They find themselves distracting themselves in other ways. They find that when they are present at some function or something, they're not completely present because their mind's always running, right? So that's what I mean about the inability to feel completely relaxed. Even when you are doing absolutely nothing, there's that underlying hum where you feel like there's always something that you're leaving behind and you're really trying to shut that out, but you can't. So that's the first sign.
Yeah, I'm listening to this exact because I'm just so engorged in this.
Sure. Yeah, the second sign is the inability to focus on one thing without feeling like it's at the expense of another. So people in chronic overwhelm tend to have a lot going on. They tend to have competing priorities. At least they perceive them to be competing priorities because of the way they process information. And that's not a bad thing. Many people respond to a lot of things going on by asking themselves, well, what is the priority, and not being able to answer that question. So when you have an inability or you find it difficult to focus on one thing without feeling like it's at the expense of another, that is a very, very common sign of chronic overwhelm. And it is something that affects people where we literally normalize it and say, well, okay, I know I have a lot going on, but in your mind, when you're chronically overwhelmed, it feels like a pressure. It feels like, okay, look at the ball. The ball's over here. Look at the ball. Look at the ball. And you feel like you're constantly being jerked around mentally.
Shani Ajak syndrome, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
On the surface, you look like nothing's going on. You look like you're focusing, but there's turmoil going on behind the scenes. A third sign is that you are at high risk if you are a perfectionist. If you are a self-described perfectionist, not if somebody else calls you a perfectionist, if you are a self-described perfectionist, you're at high risk, because perfectionists have a tendency to look at a situation as either 0 or 100%, all or nothing. Perfectionists have an all or nothing mentality. And so because of that, they don't realize and appreciate the progress that they make in certain things. Perfectionists set up rules that are impossible for them to win. And when you set up these rules and you have different things going on, or even one thing going on, it can overwhelm you if you feel that you haven't done it fully. And for a perfectionist, nothing is ever done fully because they're looking at full as perfect. And because of that, perfectionists tend to do two common things. And this is the signs within the signs, right? They do two different things. Number one, they tend to ruminate. So ruminate is they think about the things that they did and they wonder, oh, was that good enough? How was it taken? It can be seen as anxiety, but it's a form of anxiety. Rumination is backward looking. Anxiety tends to be forward looking. It's a preoccupation with worrying and the what ifs, right? So rumination is thinking about something that you did and thinking, oh my goodness, was that done correctly? How was it taken? Things like that. It's sort of past worrying. They also tend to procrastinate. A lot of perfectionists tend to procrastinate. Why? Because they don't want to make a move that they don't perceive is going to be 100% perfect. And so it paralyzes them in a way, right? So that's another sign. So we talked about 3 signs so far. The first sign is you have trouble feeling completely relaxed. The second sign is you have difficulty focusing on one thing without feeling like it's at the expense of another. And the third sign is you are a self-proclaimed or described perfectionist. And because of that, you ruminate and you tend to procrastinate.
Before we get to that fourth one.
Yeah, sure.
Because I like this little break right here.
Yeah.
Because it was hitting me on some notes. I want to make sure I pull them out. So I would call myself a purist. Now, I did do the same thing where I'm a perfectionist. But when I would do solution designs, I would go into a purist state of mind where it kind of had to be this way because it was the best practice. It was the best way to overcome risk. All of these things. So it didn't paralyze me in decision making, right? Because I could make the decisions because I could see the cliff. And so I would architect or plan a certain way to avoid it. So is there a difference between being a purist and a perfectionist?
That's a great question. So from the background that we have and talking about purists, right, and best practices, we all have best practices and there's reality, right? So reality tells us that despite best practices, things are going to happen that don't fully align with them. You're dealing with people. You're dealing with facts and feelings and the confusion of them, right? There's something called sprints, right? And in technology, there's this an agile way of doing them. And with agile, you have sprints, and agile literally means let's roll it out, see how it goes. And we're bound to find mistakes. And then based on those, let's do another sprint to fix those things and adjust. So being a purist, of course, as a structure has its benefits, and it sets us up to run full speed up a hill only to realize there's a cliff at the end, right? So perfectionism and being a purist can be seen as the same things. It's situational. It depends on the context, right? In the example that you gave, we're set up to run full speed up a hill and realize that a cliff is at the end because our map tells us there shouldn't be a cliff here. You know, this is the best practice. When a hill looks like this, a cliff typically has more jagged rocks leading up to it, and we don't see in front of us the reality of the situation. So yeah, being a purist is kind of a form of perfectionism.
Okay. I just wanted to call that out because I've heard when I would be like fighting for this solution and this guy was like, okay, you're a purist. He was kind of saying it the same way, and we don't have to do it that way. We can navigate, we can mold, we can change, we can shift. And I'm just like, no, because we're going to shift. Like, I'm telling you, we're going to shift. Like, and it's like, then let us shift. And I just couldn't let it go.
Yeah.
And that was one of my learning feedbacks that I had to take just in professional and personally. But I just wanted to ask you, like, was that a differentiator? Okay, good. All right.
Thank you. Great question.
Yeah. I like the rumination piece too, revisiting the past versus anxiety, because I must have had both of those. It's interesting because when you say rumination, all immediately what came up to mind was continuous improvement, because that's all based off of past behavior and past results. And that's all machine learning, AI, and all those models. But that's what we do as humans, right? That's how the human brain works, is we look at the past, right? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. So how do you get around rumination from a continuous improvement perspective?
So when we talk about rumination and continuous improvement, I look at rumination from pure definition of rumination, of looking back. I think that tends to lead on the unhealthier side, but looking back and learning is healthy for, continuous innovation. You can't change the past, but you can learn from it.
Oh, okay. You're like obsessed with, why didn't I do it right
the
first
time? It's something where you look back. Most people, when they ruminate, they really think about it. They focus on it. They obsess on it.
Oh my God.
And since you can't change the past, it's like a loop.
Yeah. Reminds me of Quantum Leap. That's what
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Those are my questions for the first three.
Sure. Yeah. So number 4 is that you are a high achiever. So if you are a high achiever, you are at great risk for chronic overwhelm. So being a high achiever means that in your mind, you have to go after one more thing. And you're constantly trying to top yourself. You never seem to be satisfied with where you are for long. And the subtext of being a high achiever is taking on problems that are not yours to solve. Because if not you, then who? Right? And right. And so you tend to be the fixer, the go-to person, the over supporter, that person who knows that if you take on something, you're going to do it at a high level, or you're going to endeavor to do it at a high level. And so you are looked at also as a leader. And it is something that, if you suffer from the other things we talked about, contributes to that dangerous, toxic cocktail. So tell me about, I see as you nodding going, tell me about that.
Yeah, well, okay. Yes. High achievement. Yeah, for sure. 100%. I look at high functioning, and then I differentiate that between high performing. So high functioning, right, in my opinion, is I've taught you how to function in this environment and to be able to manage it day to day to day, but with me, having to have me there to coach you through it, or mentor you through it, or lead you through it. High performing is people able to operate in the environment. They're empowered to make decisions. It's more macro management, but it's more empowering to the actual individual itself, right? So I would say, yeah, I knew that I was high achieving. You're right. I was setting the bar so high. I was like, I'm never going to, I thought about it differently. Like what you said, you give the thought meaning. And I look at it and I'm like, I'm never going to reach this bar that I keep setting for myself, because I keep moving it. It's a moving target. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach my people and have them grow. So I guess that's what I was thinking about when you said high achiever, was differentiating between high functioning and high performing.
And that's a really, really great point, because high achieving and high performing, I tease apart differently. So to your point, definitely high performing is something that we all endeavor to do. If we care enough about something, we want to do it our very, very best. And performance can be based on a lot of different factors. It can be based on someone else's expectation or structure of expected performance, like in our work, right? We have performance evaluations based upon certain expectations, and hopefully they're structured in a way that they are clear, achievable, attainable, measurable, all of those great things, right? So that's performance. And then there's achievement, right? So a high performer can be just that. However, a high performer can be subjectively a non-achiever. And when I say subjectively a non-achiever, you can have someone who performs very, very well as a stay-at-home parent, right? And in that role, they are performing like you wouldn't believe. They've got the lunches set up there. People are looking at them like, wow, goals, right? And they can be completely content in that. Then you have the high achiever, and that person can be a high performer. However, in their mind, it's not enough. In their mind, there's one more thing. They keep raising the bar, to your point, and that bar looks different for everyone. But it depends on their perception of what it means to achieve. So you could take that same parent, that same high performing parent who everybody's like, wow. And then on top of that, they may say, well, this is not enough. I'm going to enroll my kid in acting school. And then I'm going to get them into commercials. And then, so it's a constant race against yourself, constant topping of what you've done before, and the inability to remain satisfied in one place for long without feeling like you're falling behind. So that's how I tease out and differentiate high performance from high achievement. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Enough said.
So we talked about 4 things, right? Just to remind your listeners, we talked about 4 points. And the first sign is the inability to feel completely relaxed. The second sign is the inability to focus on one thing without feeling like it's at the expense of another. The third is being a self-proclaimed perfectionist. The fourth is being a high achiever, and we talked about that. And the fifth common sign of chronic overwhelm is what I call having an identity crisis. So what does it mean to have an identity crisis? Some people look at that in completely different ways, but in this particular context, it means over-identifying with your company, with your organization, right? It means being the person who feels that you have to compensate for the deficiencies and the inefficiencies within your organization. And because of that, you take on a lot of responsibility, and you soon become that go-to person who is fully taken advantage of. And you put that S on your chest because we, the company, we need to do this and we are that. You've lost your identity, right?
Oh, man. Over-identifying who? That's a good term, because I was there too. You know what? Because I thought that that's what a thought leader was. No one explained thought leadership to me. And it was like, you're going to lead the COP, this community of practice. It doesn't exist. You're right. They came to you for everything. You were the go-to person. And I was like, I'm being exploited here because I feel like I'm not really necessarily getting the recognition. I feel like the folks who I'm helping are, and they're getting to where they need to be because I'm the resource, right? I'm not really necessarily seen as the thought leader, even though they keep talking to me about it. I finally figured out, okay, Krystal, you're only responsible to what you say yes to. You do not have to say yes to everything. Like, your value isn't going to depreciate because you said no. I was just scared to look uncooperative. I was just afraid that all of these stereotypes were going to be associated to me. All these conclusions were going to be drawn about me. I was freaked out about it until I stopped caring, because I was like, girl, look what you've done. Look what you're doing.
Yeah. And to your point, it's the caring part that's the tricky part. You said until you stop caring. The journey from being that person and with that identity crisis to not caring is a journey, right? It's a very, very individual journey. There's such a stigma to saying no, simply to saying no. It makes people afraid that others are going to question their value. It makes people afraid that they're cutting off their opportunities. And there is a path that each person travels. We like to say, well, I don't care. Whether or not we admit it, there's a level within us that does care, right? So we do care to some level, depending on the context. We want to feel valuable. And if we turn down things, if we say no, it can be looked at as self-care, because it is. in the context of self-care and in the context of getting things done, being that leader. It can be seen as, oh, they're not willing, they're not able, they can't handle it, they're not cooperative, they're being difficult, right? And so all of those thoughts swirl around in our heads, and it makes us question ourselves. It makes us say, is it me? When I speak to men, when I get to work with men more closely, especially men, it's so difficult for people to tease apart their value from perception. It's so difficult to tease apart their identity from what they do. And what they do, even though it's killing them, they are afraid to say no. It's a journey.
Ooh, wait. So do you have to have all 5 signs to be at risk, or?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Because here's the tricky part. These signs come on gradually and they present in different ways and at different times possibly, right? The closer we get to burnout, and there's a difference between chronic overwhelm and burnout, they're often hugely confused. The closer we get to burnout, the more of these signs we manifest. I can't say it's almost impossible, but it's really difficult to be at the verge of burnout and not have manifested any of these signs, right? Just like it's really difficult, unless it's congenital, to have a heart attack or a stroke without first having certain things like high blood pressure or high cholesterol in the bad sense, that bad cholesterol. It's really difficult to get to a heart attack in a healthy person where they don't have those congenital conditions to get to that point without certain signs.
Very true. Okay. So now that we've gotten all these signs out, I feel like I got all the questions out that people would be asking. And if not, I hope that they would. You have a guide or a blueprint or some tools, right? On how to break free of chronic overwhelm before it's too late?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And so that's the thing. When before it's too late is the operative phrase. When you hear people saying, oh, I'm so burned out, I'm so burned out. That's like somebody saying, oh, I'm so in cardiac arrest. What they really mean is, what they really mean is I'm so chronically overwhelmed, but they don't have the language for it and they call it burnout. So in order to avoid that eventuality, there are some things that we can do in the moment. So if we are in an acute situation in the moment, so for example, you are in a situation where you are the go-to person, you are the over supporter, and you're starting to feel wary of it. You're starting to tell yourself stories about yourself that convince you that this is just life, that this is just something you need to do. And you're starting to feel anxious about saying no. The first thing to do is to challenge the story. I know it sounds simple, but it's one of the most difficult things you can do, right? And based on who you are, it can be a little bit more difficult. And based on the stories you tell, it can be a lot more challenging, right? So challenge the story you tell yourself about yourself by just saying, is that really true? Like, especially people who do suffer from anxiety, right? We can look at all the various components in a scenario. And we tend to go to like the worst case scenario, don't we, right? The worst case, right? Instead of all the various outcomes, we pick the worst. Yeah. So simply asking yourself, is that really true? The next thing to do is to find a way to get control of the moment. And getting control of a moment when you're in overwhelm is easier said than done. When you feel like you are completely submerged and you cannot mentally see straight, getting control of the moment feels impossible. So getting control of the moment could just be something as simple as grounding. There are many, many techniques. I am oversimplifying, and I want to put out that caveat right now that I am oversimplifying because it depends on the individual. And it also depends on the context and many varying factors, the way they think, the stories they tell internally. Grounding and getting control of the moment could just be getting into gratitude, right? And there's this oversimplification. It is very, very difficult to be grateful and angry at the same time. It is very, very difficult to be grateful and anxious at the same time. You start to think about all the great things. Remember you said, well, why am I doing this? I'm looking at all the great things that I did, right? Yeah. And you start to be grateful in the moment and say, wow, I really, really get to do this. And because I get to do this, I also get to qualify and disqualify things. right, to and from my life that can support me, right? So that leads to the next step. Start qualifying and disqualifying things from your life. Part of chronic overwhelm is our inability to say no because of the way we feel it will impact us. When we qualify and disqualify things to and from our life, then we are more clearly able to say, is this something that is going to support the way I want to feel every day? Is this something that is going to support what I want to create for myself, right? In order to understand what you want to create for yourself, you got to have clarity. People in chronic overwhelm lack clarity of what they really want because they are so immersed in the shoulds that they can't even hear their own voice anymore. Right? So it's about getting clarity. So how do we get clarity, Celeste? It's very, very difficult to see the picture of yourself when you are sitting in the frame. If you feel that you're chronically overwhelmed, if you feel that you identify with those signs, it is very, very important to work with a professional who specializes in chronic overwhelm. So yeah, those are the steps to begin to break free.
Folks, I feel like I just had a coaching session. Let me just say that right now. And I hope y'all do too, because this is why it is so important for people to invest in coaching. There are a lot of people that are kind of, oh, I don't need no coach. I mean, it's so important. I just cannot emphasize that. So I really do appreciate you, Celeste, for coming on here and just run a game and letting us know like what we're talking about. So it was a loaded episode today, but do you have any golden nuggets just to add some catch up to recap?
I do have golden nuggets. The one golden nugget I have is to absolutely pay attention and recognize the signs that we discussed today. That's a big golden nugget because that is going to prevent you from spiraling downward into burnout, which is the same thing as a heart attack compared to high blood pressure. The second golden nugget is get clarity. Understand what you really want for your life and how you want to feel most of the time. That is so important. If you are not clear, if you are listening to other people's expectations of you, take time to journal. I don't care who you are. If you've never journaled, journal. Start to get in touch with your own thoughts so you can hear yourself again. Okay. And another golden nugget is if you find that this is persisting, get help. It does not get better on its own. It just continues to spiral. Any more? Golden nuggets? Did we say 5 golden nuggets?
No, just as many as you said you want.
I would say let's do 3 golden nuggets because if we get people too many golden nuggets, they might get overwhelmed. People in overwhelm will continue to be more overwhelmed. Right?
Absolutely.
So those are 3 gold nuggets.
I'm going to dub you the clarity coach. Yeah, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
That's the episode today. I absolutely know that this episode relates to so many people and applies to many life scenarios. If not all, if I may be bold enough to say. Are you aware you are normalizing your stress? This is essentially prioritizing chaos over calm. Everyone over you. Did you recognize the 5 signs that you may be at risk for chronic overwhelm? Not to fear, because you have Celeste here, offering some tools on breaking free. That's why I appreciate Celeste sharing her personal story and her transition to coaching others to not only recognize chronic overwhelm, but also the practices and principles to breaking free. If you can relate to the constant demand and have found a way out of chronic overwhelm, I'd love to hear all about it. I love it all, and so will someone else. Before I let you go, Celeste, why don't you go ahead and remind the people who you are, where they can find your resources, or reach out to you?
Yes, my pleasure. I am Celeste Stacey. I can be found by going to celestestacey.com to learn more. My Instagram is at Coach Celeste Stacey, and I can be found on LinkedIn at Coach Celeste Stacey.
Awesome. I'll make sure to include all of Celeste's resources and connections in the episode description, as well as on my website's resources page, movingwithmeaning.com. Make sure you guys subscribe to the show, Moving With Meaning, the podcast, and tap that alert bell so you know when these episodes drop. I am on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and YouTube Music. Please share, like, repost, and follow. Tag someone. We are creating a community. Quick housekeeping before you go. Follow me on Instagram at movingwithmeaning82. Also connect with me on LinkedIn. I do dabble in TikTok at Krystal B. Clark. My YouTube channel is up. Kindly run over there and have a look or two. Links are in the episode. Alrighty. I'm Krystal on Moving With Meaning, the podcast, reminding you to take it one step at a time. All moves have meaning. Check y'all later.